The pavement was cold and unforgiving beneath my feet as I watched my son's car disappear around the corner, my daughter-in-law's cruel laughter echoing in the silence. 8 crumpled dollars lay at my feet, her parting gift, as my son, Brent, refused to even look at me. "Stop being so dramatic, Mom. You're being too sensitive," he had said, defending his wife's decision to leave me on a strange street corner like an old piece of furniture. What he didn't know was that a week later, I used 5 of those dollars to buy a lottery ticket, and now, holding that small piece of paper, I was finally done being too sensitive. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. The sidewalk felt rough and bitterly cold beneath my feet as I stood there watching the back of my son's car disappearing into the dusk. And all I had was $8. 8 crumpled bills that Raya, my daughter-in-law, had tossed at me like I was nothing more than a street beggar. "That should cover your bus fare home, Dela," she'd sneered, her voice soaked in that sharp, practiced cruelty she had honed over the years. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before freeloading." Freeloading. The word repeated in my mind like a taunt as I slowly bent down, my aching knees resisting every inch, to gather the scattered bills off the pavement. 37 years I spent working as a nurse. 37 years saving every spare cent to put my son through college. And now I was being called a freeloader. Brent, my son, the child I had raised entirely on my own since his father walked out when he was 5, hadn't said a word. He just sat there in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. No reaction, no protest, no attempt to stop her. When I looked at him through the passenger side window, silently pleading for him to say something, anything, that might show he still cared, he finally opened his mouth. "Mom, you're being too sensitive. Raya's right. You can't keep expecting us to take care of everything." The words didn't just hurt, they gutted me. Too sensitive. As if all those years of showing up for him, working back-to-back shifts to pay for his tuition, skipping meals just to make sure he had what he needed, and watching his kids for free every single weekend so they could go off on vacation. That was me being too sensitive. I stood there on that unfamiliar street corner, clinging to my purse like it was a shield, trying to get my bearings. The neighborhood looked rough, not the kind of place a 65-year-old woman should be wandering alone after dark. But I guess that didn't matter to them anymore. All of this had started over something so small. I'd simply asked if I could stay with them for a few days. 3 days, while my apartment was being fumigated. That was all. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't trying to impose. I just needed a place to sleep, a couch. But Raya hadn't even looked up from her phone when she shut me down. "We can't have you disrupting our routine. The kids have school. Brent has work. You'll just be in the way." I reminded her that I'd watched those same kids every weekend for 2 years. Never once had I said no when they needed help. Her face twisted like I'd insulted her. "That's different. That's family helping family. This is you expecting us to drop everything for your problems." Family helping family, as long as it was on their terms. The hypocrisy made me want to scream. "I raised him alone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I looked at Brent. "I worked nights so I could be there for his games, his school performances. I never asked anyone for anything." Raya rolled her eyes and snapped. "Maybe you should have. Maybe if you'd planned your life better, you wouldn't have to come running to us every time something goes wrong." And that's when Brent decided to speak. Not for me, but to defend her. "Raya has a point, Mom. You're an adult. You should be able to handle this stuff on your own." Those words landed harder than anything else. Not just because they were unfair, but because they betrayed everything I had ever given. This wasn't me being irresponsible. It wasn't me asking for a handout. It was a mother asking her family for kindness. But apparently I was the only one who remembered what that meant. Now here I was, completely alone on a street I didn't recognize, holding $8 and trying to figure out how the hell I was going to get home. A man at the gas station told me the nearest bus stop was 3 blocks away, but the last bus had come and gone an hour ago. A taxi would cost at least $20, money I didn't have. So I walked, my feet already sore in the sensible shoes I'd worn, thinking this evening was supposed to be a simple family dinner. With every step, I felt more discarded, like I was nothing more than some old, worn-out piece of furniture they'd finally decided to throw to the curb. The corner convenience store was the only place still lit up. I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The clerk, a young man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, looked up. "You okay, ma'am? You look like you've been crying." I instinctively touched my cheek. It was wet. I hadn't even noticed the tears. "I'm fine," I lied. I'd been lying about being fine for years. "I just need to use your phone to call a cab." "Phone's busted," he said, sounding genuinely sorry. "But there's a payphone outside." Of course there was, because of course this night still had more to take from me. I looked down at the money in my hand. The payphone would cost 50 cents, leaving me with $7.50. Nowhere near enough for a cab. I stared at the bills, heart heavy, mind blank. And then I saw it. The lottery machine in the corner, humming quietly. I'd never been a gambler, never once bought a scratch ticket or played the numbers. But at that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was spite, maybe it was despair, or maybe, just maybe, it was hope. "That lottery machine still work?" I asked the clerk. He nodded. "Powerball's tonight. Jackpot's up to 62 million. 62 million. A number so big it sounded like fiction. I thought about Raya's designer purses, about the new kitchen she'd remodeled twice in 1 year. I thought about how I'd eaten peanut butter on crackers 3 nights this week, so my Social Security check would stretch. "I'll take one," I said. "Quick pick." The machine whirred and printed my ticket. $5 gone. I had $3 left, but as I folded the slip of paper and tucked it into my purse, something flickered to life inside me. Defiance. Let them call me sensitive. Let them say I was freeloading. I'd given everything I had, my energy, my time, my love, for everyone else. Maybe now it was time to bet on myself. The walk back to my apartment took 2 full hours. My knees screamed, my feet throbbed. But what hurt most were the memories. Every cruel word, every cold glance. Yet with each step, something inside me hardened. A quiet strength, long buried, started to rise. By the time I reached my front door, I knew. Win or lose, something in my life was going to change. I was done being their on-call babysitter. Done being their emotional punching bag. Done begging for scraps of love from people who should have been giving it freely. Done being too sensitive just because I didn't want to be treated like I was disposable. Because maybe, just maybe, I was about to become more than they could ever imagine. The numbers flashed across my TV screen days later. I had been half asleep on my couch, my third cup of tea cooling beside me. The silence of my phone louder than anything on the news. It had been 7 days since that night. 7 days since they abandoned me. And I had completely forgotten about the ticket. Love or just entitlement dressed up as affection? That was the question I kept turning over in my mind, long after I'd left the lawyer's office with a folder full of documents and the weight of $62 million tucked quietly into the corners of my otherwise unremarkable life. Everything looked the same, but I had changed. Or maybe I was finally becoming someone I'd always been too afraid to be. Someone who didn't beg for space in the lives of people who only saw her when it was convenient. I made myself a cup of tea that evening and sat by the window, letting the steam warm my face. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, a car honked, and life went on just as before. But inside me, something had settled. A resolve, a quiet kind of power. By Sunday, my phone was full of unread messages. Raya tried sarcasm first, then guilt. "So you're just cutting us off now? Over nothing?" Brent tried to reason. "You're being unfair, Mom. We didn't mean anything by it." But I didn't answer, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to teach them a lesson. I just didn't want to anymore. Didn't want to shrink myself into someone who was easy to dismiss, someone whose feelings could be laughed off as too sensitive. That afternoon, I drove out to a quiet part of town where the streets curved gently and the houses had wraparound porches and ivy climbing the fences. I parked outside a white brick home with blue shutters and a for sale sign in the yard. The realtor, a woman named Lena, met me with a smile and a key in hand. "Ready to take a look?" The house was perfect in that way old homes sometimes are. Full of character, not too polished, not too modern. Just enough space for a new kind of life. I walked through the kitchen, my fingertips brushing against the cool marble countertops. The kind I used to see in magazines and think, someday. Now someday was today. Upstairs, sunlight spilled across hardwood floors and into a room that I imagined as my library. Bookshelves lining every wall, a big chair in the corner by the window. Peace, Lynn. I'll take it, I said. Lena blinked, surprised. Do you want to think about it? Maybe look at a few others? No, I said softly, but with certainty. This is the one. There was power in choosing something just for myself, without anyone else's approval or permission. I didn't need to explain. I didn't owe anyone justification. For the first time in years, my choices were my own. Back home, I packed slowly. I donated things I no longer needed, holding on to only what mattered. The photo albums, a few well-loved books, the ceramic mug my mother gave me on my 30th birthday. Not much else. The hardest part was deciding what to do about the money. Sarah and the lawyer had both warned me. People will come out of the woodwork, they'd said. Be careful who you trust. So I made a plan, not just for the money, but for my life. I set up a foundation under a different name, one that no one could trace back to me. Quiet donations to women's shelters, to libraries, to food banks, places where people like me, forgotten, dismissed, went looking for hope. I didn't tell Raya or Brent. Not yet, maybe not ever. I wasn't hiding. I was protecting something precious. My peace, my freedom. One morning, while unpacking boxes in my new kitchen, I found the lottery ticket tucked between two cookbooks. I held it for a moment, its edges soft now from all the handling, and smiled. That little slip of paper had changed everything, but not in the way I first thought. It hadn't made me rich. It had made me seen by myself. It was a strange thing to realize that all the years I'd spent wishing someone would finally value me, the only person I really needed that from was me. And now I did. Sure, they never saw a scent of what was coming. Their indifference had finally severed something inside me. Clean, final. No more second chances. No more rationalizing their selfishness as just stress or bad timing. No more excuses for people who had turned their backs the moment I needed them most. For so long, I had clung to the fantasy that if I ever came into money, everything would change. That they'd see me, really see me, not as a problem to manage or a source of free babysitting, but as a person who had carried them through the worst times of their lives. I thought the money would make them proud of me. I thought it would draw us closer, heal the cracks that had long ago split our family into something brittle and barely functioning. But now, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by the familiar scent of loneliness and lavender cleaning spray, I saw the truth for what it was. The money didn't matter. Not to them, because their love, their loyalty, their basic human decency, those things had never been mine to lose. I'd been pretending they were there all along, that maybe I hadn't given enough, that maybe I just needed to be more patient, more forgiving. But now I understood. They didn't fail me because they didn't know how to help. They failed me because they didn't want to, because I had outlived my usefulness, because once I stopped giving, they had no reason to stay. So I planned. I planned like I had never planned before. My chest still ached in flashes, reminders of what I'd narrowly escaped, but my mind was sharper than ever. I made appointments. I asked quiet, pointed questions. I took notes. I told no one. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no accusations or screaming matches, no chance for them to twist this into me being too emotional or overreacting again. I'd had enough of being cast as the needy one, the overbearing mother, the fragile woman at the edge of everyone's patience. No, this time I would be methodical, careful, visible until the moment I chose otherwise. I pictured Brent's face when he found out. I could see the disbelief curdling into anger. Not because he cared, but because he'd realized what he'd missed out on. The vacations that would never be paid for, the college funds that would never be filled, the inheritance that would never arrive. Let them be shocked. Let them scramble. Let them finally understand what disappointment really felt like. I wasn't going to spend the last years of my life begging to be loved by people who had made it abundantly clear I was only ever a footnote in their lives. I had 62 million reasons not to, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. This wasn't revenge, it was clarity, and it tasted like freedom. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I need to update my will, I told him plainly, and I want to establish a few trusts. He was quiet for a moment, then said, trying to prevent anyone from making undue influence claims? Exactly, I replied. especially after what's happened lately. I need to make sure that if anything happens to me, certain people can't pretend they cared for me out of love. I want everything documented." He paused. "Smart move. Based on what you've told me about their recent behavior, I think that's wise." "There's one more thing," I added. "I want to test them, just one more time, but I want the whole thing written down." He sounded intrigued. "What kind of test?" I told him everything. The chest pains, how they reacted, Raya's suggestion that I be warehoused in some assisted living facility. I wanted to see just how far they would go. I needed to know with certainty what kind of people I was really dealing with before making any final decisions about the rest of my life. He was silent for a long moment. "Mrs. Rivers, are you sure you want to go through this? You already know they don't treat you well." "I know they don't respect me," I corrected, "but I still need to find out if there's any love left, any true concern, because if there isn't," I stopped myself, but the thought was already burning inside me. "If there isn't, then I need to stop pretending otherwise." I thought about the $62 million in my name, about 37 years of tireless nursing work, about the son who had the nerve to call me needy when I was in real pain. If there truly wasn't any love left in them, then I needed to see it fully and clearly so I could let go. So I started testing them subtly over the course of the next week. I called them up and said I felt dizzy. Another time, I said I was struggling with my medications. I even told them I was confused and scared. Each time, their reactions were like clockwork. Annoyance, irritation, no offer to stop by, no suggestion that I see their family doctor, no concern beyond referring me to cheap senior services. Never once did either of them act like I mattered, like I was more than an inconvenience. By Friday, I had my answer. They didn't love me. They hardly even tolerated me. And now that I was no longer the one giving, no longer the one supporting them, now that I needed them instead, they were trying to unload me. It should have devastated me, but instead, it felt like a door had opened. I saw the truth, and it gave me clarity. I could stop hoping, stop imagining, stop waiting for the affection that was never going to come. I could move forward, clearly and with purpose. 3 weeks later, Ria called. "We're having a little family gathering Sunday evening," she said, her voice dripping with performative sweetness and thinly veiled obligation. "Nothing formal, just us and the kids. Brent thought it would be nice to have you over," she added. Brent thought. Not we, not I, just Brent, which likely meant his guilty conscience had finally started to gnaw at him. Maybe he remembered how they left me on a street corner 26 days ago while I was clutching my chest in pain. Maybe now he wanted to sweep it all under the rug. "What's the occasion?" I asked calmly. "Oh, just some family time," she replied lightly. "We realized it's been a while since we were all together." 26 days. That's how long it had been since they'd treated me like disposable baggage. And yet here we were, pretending like everything was fine. "Should I bring anything?" I asked, already knowing what the answer would be. "Actually, if you could make that potato salad the kids love, that'd be perfect," she chirped. "And maybe grab some dinner rolls, the good ones from Romano's, not the store-bought kind." Even their invitation came with errands, with a shopping list. I was allowed at their table, but only if I paid the price of admission and brought my own offerings. "What time should I be there?" 5:30, she said, then added, "Oh, and Dela, maybe wear that blue dress, the one you wore on Easter? You looked really nice in it." The blue dress, the one that was 3 years old and thinning at the seams. But of course, in their eyes, that was the best I could do. That was enough. Sunday evening, I stood on their front porch, a dish of potato salad in one hand, a bag of expensive Romano's dinner rolls in the other. Laughter spilled out from inside. Through the front window, I saw Emma and Jake darting around the living room, while Brent and Raya lounged on their leather sectional, glasses of wine in hand. It looked idyllic, warm, like the kind of family dinner I'd spent decades dreaming of. But the warmth was an illusion, a mirage on the surface. Raya opened the door. She wore a flowing silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. Her smile was too bright, too rehearsed. "Dela, so glad you made it. Come in, come in." The scent of roast beef and garlic wafted through the air. Expensive candles flickered from every shelf. The dining table held a fresh floral arrangement. Every pillow on the couch was staged just so. It was a perfect home, the kind I used to imagine having, back when I was working double shifts and scraping together enough money for Brent's school clothes while living off instant noodles myself. Emma, sweet Emma, ran to me and threw her arms around my legs. At least the kids still lit up when they saw me. Hi, sweetheart, I said, kissing her hair. How's school? Good. I got an A on my science project. Want to see it? But before I could say yes, Raya stepped in with a tight smile. Why don't you help Grandma put her food away, honey? Dinner's almost ready. In the kitchen, I placed my potato salad and rolls next to Raya's spread. Everything looked professionally catered, down to the matching serving bowls and meticulous presentation. This all looks wonderful, I said and meant it. Thanks. I've been cooking all day, she replied with a dramatic exhale like she'd just climbed Everest. But I noticed the price tag still on some of the containers. Clearly, not everything had been homemade. Brent walked in holding a beer. He gave me one of those awkward half hugs, the kind you give an acquaintance you barely know. Hey, Mom, good to see you. Good to see you too, I replied, studying his face for any trace of warmth, any sign that he had missed me. But his smile was polite, practiced, the same one he'd give a coworker in the break room. How have you been feeling? He asked. Any more of those chest pain episodes? It should have sounded caring, but his voice was too casual, as if he were asking about traffic conditions, not my health. I'm managing, I said. Good, that's what I figured. You're tough. There it was again. Tough, translation. We don't have to worry about you. We don't have to show up or check in or care. Dinner began pleasantly enough. The children chatted about school. Brent talked about a promotion. But underneath it all, I sat in quiet observation, watching, remembering, knowing. The evening had started off almost pleasantly. Brent was talking about some project at work he was hopeful about, while Raya entertained us with the latest neighborhood gossip. For a short while, I allowed myself to believe this was what I'd always wanted, just a simple, happy family dinner where I felt I belonged. It was comforting, like slipping into a warm bath after a long day. But that illusion, as warm and fleeting as it was, shattered halfway through the meal. So, Mom, Brent began, slicing through his roast beef with the precision of a surgeon, Raya and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider some lifestyle changes. The way he said it, so calm, so deliberately neutral, sent a quiet wave of dread through me. My stomach tightened instinctively. What kind of changes? I asked, already sensing the answer but needing to hear it from them. Raya leaned forward, wearing that particular expression that always meant trouble, a concerned, overly sympathetic look that signaled she was about to say something cruel under the guise of care. We're just worried about you living alone, she said, especially with your recent health scares. What if something serious happened and no one was there to help? I tried to keep my tone measured. I have neighbors, and I can always call 911. But that's not really a long-term solution, is it? Brent chimed in, ever the pragmatist. You're 65 now. These things are only going to become more frequent. These things, my age, my body, my life, had become clinical problems to be handled, not realities to be accepted, not natural, just obstacles to manage. What are you suggesting? I asked, even though the answer felt inevitable. Raya perked up, as though she'd been waiting for that very question. There's this wonderful place, Sunset Manor, she said with artificial brightness. It's an assisted living community, very highly rated. They have all kinds of amenities, on-site medical care, meal plans, activities. You'd have your independence, but support too. It would lift a huge burden off your shoulders. And ours, Brent added, no longer bothering to sugarcoat it. We're constantly worried, Mom, about whether you're eating properly, remembering your medications, staying safe. This way, we'd have peace of mind. Peace of mind. That's what they were buying. Not safety for me, but freedom from guilt. For them. They wanted to place me somewhere, anywhere, that would make it easier for them to stop thinking about me. Have you looked into this place? I asked. Oh yes, Raya said eagerly. I drove by last week. The grounds are beautiful. The staff seem friendly, and it's not too expensive. She emphasized that last part with a kind of false reassurance, as if the numbers were comforting. Well, within your Social Security budget, Brent added, his tone almost clinical, if you're careful with your spending. Within my budget. They'd done the math, calculated the cost of removing me from their daily lives, and found it acceptable. How efficient of them. The best part, Rhea continued, glowing now, is that it's only about 20 minutes away. We could visit regularly. How regularly? I asked. They glanced at each other. That glance told me everything I needed to know. Well, you know, Brent said, with our schedules probably once a month, maybe more during the holidays, once a month. After everything, after raising Brent, comforting him through heartbreaks and scraped knees, pouring my soul into his future, they were offering me monthly visits, like a volunteer program. What about the kids, I asked. When would I see Emma and Jake? Another glance between them, longer this time, more uncomfortable. Raya took the lead again, her tone hesitant. The thing is, we think it might be better if their visits were supervised. Supervised? Like I was some unstable element in their lives. You know how you get when you're upset or stressed, she added. We don't want the kids to be confused or frightened. How do I get? I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Raya waved a hand in the air, vaguely dismissive. You know, emotional, needy. The kids don't understand why grandma's always so sad or anxious. Sad and anxious. Because I've been mourning the slow, quiet death of the family I thought I had. Because while I clung to memories, they were busy writing me out of their future. I really think this is best for everyone, Brent said, as if this conversation were a business transaction nearing its end. You'd get the care you need. The kids would see you at your best. We'd all feel more at ease. I looked at them. My son, calmly negotiating my removal. My daughter-in-law, practically glowing at the idea of being done with me. And my grandchildren, too young to understand but old enough to learn that love had terms and limits. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, Raya said sweetly. Take your time. But I should mention there's a waiting list. So if you're interested, we should probably get your name down soon. A waiting list. They had done more than plan this. They'd coordinated it, thought it through. All tonight was missing was the signature on the dotted line. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I needed space. Away from their practiced concern, their eager plans. I looked in the mirror, at the blue dress Raya had insisted I wear, at the careful makeup I'd put on, trying to look presentable, like someone worthy of attention. And I saw myself for who I really was. Not just a lonely old woman desperate for affection, but a lonely old woman with $62 million and absolutely nothing left to lose. When I returned to the dining room, they looked up expectantly, like I might suddenly thank them for solving the inconvenience of my existence. I've made my decision, I said as I sat back down. Oh, that's wonderful, Raya beamed. I think you're going to love it there. Should I call tomorrow and put your name down? I looked at each of them, slowly. At my son, who had never once asked if I was lonely. At my daughter-in-law, who had calculated my worth down to the penny. At my grandchildren, who were being taught that love came with expiration dates. No, I said quietly. I don't think I'll be needing assisted living after all. The silence that followed was deep and cold. Raya let out a short, forced laugh. What do you mean you won't be needing it? Her smile was cracking. Dela, we explained why this is the best option for everyone. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I've made other arrangements. Brent leaned in, frowning. What kind of arrangements? Mom, you can't ignore reality just because you don't like it. Reality. The word echoed in my mind, tinged with irony. Actually, I said, reaching into my purse, I think it's time we all face reality. I pulled out the lottery ticket, not the original, of course. That was locked away in my lawyer's vault, but I had made a perfect copy, just for this moment. And I laid it gently on the table. Between the elegant dishes and flickering candlelight, I watched their faces shift as they read the numbers printed on the paper. Raya was the first to speak, though her voice had softened to nearly a whisper. What is this? It's a lottery ticket, I answered calmly, my hand steady in my lap. From the night you left me on Elm Street with nothing but $8. Brent leaned forward, picking up the slip of paper. His eyes scanned the numbers, confused and unconcerned. Mom, what are you trying to say? So you bought a lottery ticket? So what? Check the winning numbers from 3 weeks ago, I said. They should be on your phone. I kept my gaze on him as he pulled out his phone, fingers quickly swiping through apps and web pages. I knew the moment he found them. His face lost all color. His expression turned from skepticism to something I had never seen in him before. Pure, unfiltered fear. $62 million, I said for him. That was the jackpot you heard about on the news 3 weeks ago. That was me. Raya grabbed the ticket from Brent's trembling hands, her eyes flitting between the numbers on the ticket and the ones glowing on the screen. Her lipstick, once flawlessly applied, had left crimson smudges on the rim of her wine glass. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked unsettled, truly deeply shaken. You won the lottery? She asked, barely audible. I did. The children, perceptive in their innocence, had gone silent. Emma was glancing nervously between the adults, trying to piece together the tension that had suddenly swallowed the room. "Why didn't you tell us?" Brent asked, his voice cracked, the bravado slipping. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch while I studied their faces. People I had known my whole life, yet lately felt like strangers. Because I wanted to see how you would treat me when you thought I had nothing to offer. The truth of those words hung thick in the air, heavy and undeniable. Raya opened her mouth, then closed it again without sound. Brent ran a hand through his hair in a gesture I remembered well from his childhood, one he used when caught in a lie. "Mom, that's not fair. We weren't—" Brent's voice faded as he struggled to find the right words. "You weren't what?" I asked gently. "You weren't trying to get rid of me? You weren't measuring the cost of shipping me off to an institution? You weren't planning to reduce my time with my grandchildren because I was too difficult?" "We were worried about you," Raya said, but the usual sharpness in her voice was gone, replaced by something thinner, something less certain. "Were you?" I tilted my head, because from where I sit, it seemed like you were solving a problem. An inconvenient, fragile, emotionally draining problem. A burden who no longer fit into your pristine lives. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I've spent the past 3 weeks documenting our interactions. Every call, every message, every conversation where decisions about my life were made without me. Brent had gone pale. His hands were now gripping the edge of the table. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I know exactly who you both are. I know that when I called crying in pain, you told me I was overreacting. I know that when I needed someone to sit with me, you recommended professional care. I know that this dinner tonight wasn't about reconnecting. It was about delivering your verdict, your solution to the nuisance of my existence." Raya's voice rose an octave, strained and trembling. "That's not fair, Dela. You're twisting things. We love you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because I've spent months trying to figure out what love looks like in this family, and I'm starting to think I don't recognize it anymore." I opened the folder, laying out printed messages. "Here's you, Raya, telling me to stop being dramatic after I was left alone on a street corner. Here's you advising me to manage my anxiety better, even as I described symptoms of what turned out to be a heart condition. And this," I said, holding up another page, "is you researching nursing homes while I was begging you to listen." Her cheeks turned crimson. "I was trying to help," she muttered. "Help whom, Bumwa?" I asked, turning to Brent. "Because it wasn't me. And you, when I called you from the hospital, your first response was irritation. When I asked to stay during my recovery, you said I was too needy. When I needed my son, you gave me silence, or worse, excuses." Brent's eyes shone, his voice cracking. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We want to fix this." "Can you?" I asked softly. "Because I've been giving you the chance to do better. I waited. I gave you time. But each time you chose to see me as a problem instead of a person, as a burden instead of your mother." I took out my phone and showed them the screen. "This is my lawyer's number. I called him yesterday. We made some changes." Silence engulfed the room. "What kind of changes?" Raya asked, barely audible. "I was originally leaving everything to Brent and the kids. A trust fund for Emma and Jake's education, the house, the savings. But then I listened tonight to how I'm too unstable to be around my own grandchildren, how I should be supervised, how I'm not well enough to care for myself." "Mom, that's not—" Brent tried to interrupt. "You meant every word," I cut him off, "and I believe you." I reached into the folder again and pulled out a document. "This is a copy of my new will. The children will still receive a modest trust, enough for education, but not enough to make them targets. The rest goes to charities that support elderly people abandoned by their families." Raya made a sound, a choked mix of disbelief and grief. "There's also this," I said, laying another set of papers on the table. "A full record of everything I've contributed to this family. Every mortgage payment I helped with, every vacation I funded, every time I bought school supplies, covered unexpected bills, paid for activities, all with interest, calculated at market rates." Brent took the paper with trembling hands. "Mom, this says we owe you over $200,000. "That's correct. 27 years of support. I'm not asking for it back. Consider it a gift, my final one. But I wanted you to see, to understand exactly how much your needy, dramatic mother gave, financially and emotionally, to the life you're so desperate to keep separate from her. The silence was thick now. You could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. Emma tugged at Raya's sleeve, her voice small. Mommy, why is everyone crying? Because they were. Raya's mascara streaked her cheeks, and Brent's eyes were rimmed with red as he stared at the numbers that now meant more than money. They were a record of love unreturned, of years unseen. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said gently. I'm doing this because you've made it crystal clear. You only want me in your lives when I'm easy, when I cost you nothing. I'm useful to you, and I'm done being useful to people who don't love me. Brent's voice broke in desperation. We do love you, Mom. We made mistakes. No, I said quietly, steadily. You made choices. And I've spent years cleaning up after those choices, again and again. I looked directly at them, my voice firm but not angry. You chose to see me as something to manage, not someone to cherish. Tonight wasn't some random blow-up. It was just the final display of a decision you both made long ago. I pushed my chair back and stood, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, an unintentional punctuation mark on the end of something that had been breaking for a long time. I want you to hear this. I don't hate you, either of you. I paused, letting the words settle. But I don't trust you, and I can't build anything meaningful with people who only value me when I have something they need. Where are you going? Raya's voice trembled, her panic unmistakable now. Home. To my apartment. I reached for my purse and the folder I'd brought with me. The one you both think is too dangerous for me to live in alone. I slung the strap over my shoulder, holding her gaze. You don't need to worry about visiting me at Sunset Manor. I won't be there. Mom, wait. Brent stood up so fast his chair toppled over with a loud bang behind him. Please, let's just talk. We can fix this. I stared at him. This man I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, devoted 37 years of my life to, every holiday, every scraped knee, every late-night phone call, and heartbreak. Can we? I asked softly. Because I've been trying to fix it for months, and every time, every single time, those talks end with you pointing out what's wrong with me, how I need to change in order to fit into your lives. That's not what we meant. It's exactly what you meant, I said, not flinching. And you know what? You're right about one thing. I do need to change. I need to stop begging for love from people who've already decided I'm not worth the effort. I started walking toward the door, their footsteps echoing behind me. In the foyer, surrounded by decades of family photos that somehow managed to always include everyone but me, I turned one last time. The money changes everything for me, I said, the words slow and deliberate. But it doesn't change a thing about who you are. Tonight, you both showed me exactly who you've become, and I believe you. I opened the door and stepped into the cool night air. Behind me, Raya's voice cracked, rising in a desperate cry. Dela, please, we can start over. We can do better. I didn't turn back. Some bridges once burned aren't meant to be rebuilt. As I drove through the quiet streets of the neighborhood I'd once called home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not joy, not yet. But peace, the kind that comes from finally laying down a fight you were never going to win. My phone buzzed before I even reached my apartment. Brent's name flashed across the screen, then Raya's, then Brent's again. I turned it off and drove the rest of the way in silence, so quiet it felt sacred. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more desperate attempts to undo nearly 4 decades of being taken for granted. But not tonight. Tonight, I was free from their judgment, their endless expectations, their cruelty disguised as concern, free to imagine what a life could be when it belonged entirely to me. 5 months later, I stood in the garden of my new home, the early morning sun stretching golden and pink across the Colorado mountains. The house was modest by lottery winner standards, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a wraparound porch overlooking 20 acres of untouched land. But it was mine, every square foot chosen by me. From the grain of the hardwood floors to the way sunlight poured through the kitchen windows each morning. The phone calls had stopped about 3 months ago. At first, they were frantic. Brent called twice a day. Raya sent texts that bounced wildly between apologies and accusations. They tried everything: guilt, anger, fake promises, even threats to cut contact completely. That last one almost made me laugh. The final call had come in January. Brent's voice was hoarse, worn down. Mom, please, I know we messed up. I know we hurt you, but we're family. That has to count for something. It does, I told him. It counted for 37 years. But family's supposed to be a two-way street, and you turned it into a one-way extraction. I don't know how to fix this, he said, defeated. And for a moment, just a moment, his sadness almost made me cave. Brent, I said quietly, you can't fix this. You can only learn from it. What does that even mean? It means you need to learn how to be a better husband to Raya, a better father to Emma and Jake, and a better son to whatever family you choose to build going forward. I paused, but it doesn't include me anymore. You're really never coming back? That day, I looked around at my apartment, at the neatly stacked boxes ready for Colorado, at the plans I was finally making for me. There's nothing to come back to, Brent. You made sure of that. And now, standing in my rose garden, snipping away at faded blossoms along the white picket fence, I felt the truth of those words down to my bones. There really was nothing to go back to, but there was so much more to move toward. Margaret, my 73-year-old neighbor and retired school teacher, waved at me from her garden next door. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago. We'd become fast friends through morning coffee chats and evening strolls. The kind of easy companionship I hadn't even realized I was missing. Beautiful morning, she called. Perfect for the farmer's market, I called back. You still coming with me? Wouldn't miss it. 10 minutes. This was the life I hadn't known I needed. Friends who showed up when they said they would, who remembered the little things, who treated my time and my feelings as something precious. Margaret never once accused me of being too needy. When I got food poisoning last month, she brought over soup and stayed to watch old movies with me. No guilt, no sighs, no scorekeeping. The market was bustling with its usual Saturday energy. I'd become a familiar face among the vendors, buying fresh vegetables and crusty bread from people who knew my name and remembered my garden. It was such a small thing, to be known, to be seen. But after so many years of being invisible in my own family, it felt like a quiet revolution. Sarah waved me over from her herb stall. Saved you some of that basil you love. As I handed her cash, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I instinctively tensed. Even 6 months later, surprise messages still made my stomach drop. But this time it wasn't Brent or Raya. It was from Emma. Hi, Grandma. Mommy gave me your number. I miss you. Can I call you sometime? I stared at the screen for a long moment, my chest tightening with emotion too layered to name. Emma would be 9 now, old enough to start wondering why her grandma wasn't around anymore. Old enough to miss me. I typed back slowly. I miss you too, sweetheart. You can call me anytime. The reply came instantly. Can I call now? I glanced across the market to where Margaret was thoughtfully comparing tomatoes. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled with no heaviness in my heart. On an ordinary Saturday morning, I followed the routine I had carefully crafted for myself in this new chapter of life. I found a quiet spot, pulled out my phone, and dialed Emma's number. Grandma, she answered, her voice small, hesitant. Hi, baby girl, how are you? I'm okay. Mommy said you moved far away because you were sad. Children have such a disarming way of getting straight to the truth. Something like that, I replied gently. How's school? How's your brother? For the next 20 minutes, Emma chatted nonstop about her new teacher, her best friend's birthday party, the book she was reading. Just ordinary things for a 9-year-old, but each word filled my heart with warmth and also broke it a little. I soaked in the sound of her voice, trying to etch every detail into memory. Then, as we neared the end of the call, she asked quietly, Grandma, are you happy now where you live? Her question stopped me. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Yes, sweetheart, I am happy. Good, and she said, Mommy cries sometimes and says she misses you. I closed my eyes, the weight of past choices pressing down on me like a stone. I miss your mommy too, I said softly. But sometimes grown-ups make decisions that hurt people, and those hurts take a long time to heal. Will you ever come back? She asked, the question I had feared most. I don't think so, Emma, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. Sometimes love alone isn't enough to fix everything. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my car, watching families stroll hand in hand through the Saturday market. Part of me wanted to drive back to that house, to walk through the front door and pretend the past 6 months had never happened, to become that grandmother again, the one who baked cookies and gave out hugs regardless of how she was treated in return. But I had done that for 37 long years, and it had nearly broken me. So instead, I drove back to the small house I now called home. I returned to the quiet of my garden, the sanctuary I had made for myself. That afternoon, I called my lawyer and arranged to set up a trust fund for Emma and Jake. Not so much that they'd grow up spoiled, but just enough to ensure they'd always know that their grandmother loved them, even from a distance. That evening, I was on the porch with a cup of tea and a novel when Margaret showed up with a bottle of wine. "You look like you could use some company," she said with a warm smile. I told her everything, about Emma's call, about the tangled mess of guilt and love and grief that comes from walking away from your own family. Margaret listened without interrupting, without judgment. She simply let me talk, as only a true friend can. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly when I finally stopped. I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it had to come to this. I regret that my son and his wife valued their pride more than our relationship. I regret that my grandchildren will grow up wondering why their grandmother left. I paused. But do I regret leaving? I turned toward the garden, to the vibrant flowers I had planted with my own 2 hands. I looked out at the fading sunset spilling colors across the sky, at the peace that had rooted itself deep within me over the past few months. "No," I said at last, "I don't regret choosing myself." A year later, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was a graduation announcement. Emma had finished 4th grade with honors. Tucked inside was a handwritten note in careful block letters. "I hope you're still happy, Grandma. I love you." I placed the card on my refrigerator, next to snapshots of my garden, pictures of new friends, a reminder for my book club, and an invitation to Margaret's birthday dinner. It was a small piece of my old life, quietly existing within my new one. I didn't send a gift. I didn't call. But I asked my lawyer to add another $1,000 to Emma's trust fund, this one for graduation presents, for milestones yet to come. I had come to understand something important. Love doesn't always mean being there physically. Sometimes love is silent, it's distant. Sometimes it's letting go with grace. Sometimes love means protecting your own heart from people who refuse to see your value, even if they share your blood. 2 years had passed since that dinner, the one that had shifted everything. And now, for the first time, I was truly happy. Not the kind of happiness that scrambles and begs for love that never comes, but the solid, unshakable peace of a woman who has learned to love herself first. I volunteered at the local senior center, teaching women how to manage their finances and guard their emotional boundaries. I didn't travel the world, but I explored quiet towns and national parks, staying in cozy bed and breakfasts, photographing wildflowers along the way. I dated a gentleman named Robert who listened to me, respected me, cherished me. Most importantly, I finally knew the difference between being alone and being lonely. For 37 years, I'd been painfully lonely, even as I sat surrounded by family. Now I was blissfully alone and wealthier in every way that mattered. Some nights, I'd sit on my porch and wonder what might have happened if I'd chosen differently. If I had said yes to their terms, if I had moved into that assisted living facility and settled for crumbs of affection, waiting for short visits with my grandkids, telling myself that scraps of love were better than nothing. But I didn't. I chose dignity over desperation. I chose self-worth over self-sacrifice. I chose to believe I deserved more than being merely tolerated by the people who should have cherished me. The lottery had given me $62 million, but walking away from people who couldn't see my worth, that gave me something beyond measure. The quiet but powerful truth that I was already enough, just as I was, whether anyone else saw it or not. Sometimes the greatest inheritance you can leave isn't money. Sometimes it's the example of how to love yourself, how to set a boundary, how to walk away from any table where you're not valued. I hope that someday Emma would remember that lesson, that she'd remember her grandmother had been brave enough to leave, strong enough to start over, and wise enough to understand that love without respect isn't love at all. As the sun sank behind the mountains, lighting up the sky in colors only nature could dream of, I raised my teacup in a quiet toast. To the woman I had become, to every hard choice that brought me here, to the life I had finally claimed as mine. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Some end in liberation, and sometimes that's the most beautiful ending there is.